Cowboy tracked Apache through dust trails, and her final question cut like a knife. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Jacob Wilder was a cowboy with a past he couldn't escape. He wasn't the kind to talk about his past or let it haunt him, but some things just wouldn't fade away. Years of running cattle, living alone on the edge of the frontier, and working through the dust and sweat of the unforgiving plains had hardened him. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to face. The wind howled through the dry desert as Jacob followed the trail, a thin line of dust cutting through the otherwise barren landscape. His eyes, sharp from years of tracking, kept scanning the ground, the disturbed earth, the shifting marks left by a pair of boots that had passed through hours before. It was the Apache girl he was tracking, the one whose name he didn't know, but whose presence had haunted him for days. He hadn't meant to chase her, but when she disappeared from the scene of the incident, he knew it was only a matter of time before she came looking for answers. She had disappeared into the vast expanse of the desert, and Jacob was determined to find her, hoping to make things right, or at least understand what had driven her to this point. The sun began to set as he pressed on, the sky above shifting from a sharp blue to the warm tones of orange and purple. The silence of the wilderness was deafening, broken only by the sound of his horse's hooves crunching on the dry earth. As he neared a narrow canyon, he could make out the silhouette of a figure ahead, standing against the rocky backdrop. It was her, Nayeli Redfeather, the Apache girl who had been a part of something he couldn't quite understand. Her back was turned to him, her hair flowing in the wind, and in that moment he could sense something in her stance, something almost defiant, as though she knew he was coming. Jacob's hand rested on the reins, but his heart pounded with uncertainty. She hadn't run, hadn't tried to escape, as he expected. Instead, she was waiting for him, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the horizon as though she had already prepared for whatever was to come. As he approached, his voice broke the silence. "Nayeli!" he called, his tone cautious. She didn't turn around immediately, but when she did, her eyes locked with his. There was no fear there, no anger, just a quiet intensity that made Jacob question his motives for following her. "What do you want, Cowboy?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade. Jacob hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "I didn't mean for things to go this way," he said, his voice softer now. "But I've been tracking you for days, hoping to make things right." She tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "You think you can fix what's broken with words, Cowboy?" she asked, her question hanging in the air between them. Jacob swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't about fixing things. It wasn't about making amends. It was about something deeper, something neither of them could easily escape. The question she had asked, though simple, felt like it cut through everything he thought he knew about himself. He had tracked her for days, thinking he could understand her pain, thinking he could find some way to make up for his past mistakes. But her final question stopped him dead in his tracks, forcing him to confront the truth of the situation. He hadn't been following her to fix anything. He had been following her because he was haunted by the idea of what he had done, and he wasn't sure if he could ever make it right. Jacob felt the weight of Nayeli's question settle in his chest like a stone, her steady gaze piercing through him as if she could see into the very heart of his past. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, with only the soft rustle of the wind to break it. Jacob had been prepared for many things, anger, fear, perhaps even a fight, but not this. Not the calm, controlled way she stood, waiting for him to speak, her expression unreadable. He had followed her for days, not knowing what he hoped to find. Was it redemption? Justice? Or perhaps just a chance to explain himself? But now that he was here, face to face with her, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to say. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said finally, his voice rough, the words coming out slowly, as though testing them for truth. I know what happened, and I can't undo it. But I need you to understand. He faltered, unsure of how to continue. Nayeli took a small step forward, her presence undeniable in the vast, empty space. You think understanding will make it right? She asked softly. Her words weren't accusing, but there was an edge to them, a quiet strength that seemed to grow with each passing second. Jacob's heart tightened as he thought about the things he had done, the choices he had made. He had never intended for things to turn out this way. He had never meant to hurt anyone, certainly not someone like her. But the damage had been done, and now he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. I know it doesn't, he replied, shaking his head. But I can't go on like this, thinking you're out there, carrying the weight of this alone. She stood silently for a moment, her eyes scanning his face, searching for something he wasn't sure he could give. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, weathered object, holding it out to him. It was a pendant, a simple piece of silver with intricate markings that Jacob didn't recognize. The same pendant he had seen on her neck the first time they crossed paths, only now it was tarnished, worn by time and the harsh conditions of the desert. Do you know what this is? She asked, her voice steady but firm. Jacob took the pendant, turning it over in his hand. The weight of it felt heavy, as though it carried with it the weight of her entire life. I don't, he admitted, his voice quiet. Nayeli watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke again. This is a reminder, she said softly, of everything that's been taken from me. Of everything that's been lost. Jacob felt the words sink into him, deep into his core. The pain in her voice was palpable, a rawness that spoke of years of suffering and survival. She wasn't just speaking of the past, of what had happened to her family, to her people. She was speaking of something more, something he couldn't quite grasp but could feel deep inside. I didn't know, he said quietly, his fingers still tracing the design on the pendant. I didn't understand what you had lost. What I had taken. Nayeli's gaze softened slightly, but her voice remained calm and measured. You can't understand it all, Cowboy. Not yet. But the question is, what will you do now? Jacob looked at her, the question hanging in the air between them. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he knew one thing for certain, whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. He wasn't sure if he could ever make things right. But he couldn't walk away now. Not after everything that had been said. I'll do whatever I can, he said, his voice steady. I'll help you if you'll let me. Nayeli didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned, her back to him as she surveyed the desert stretching out before them. Jacob followed her gaze, feeling a sense of uncertainty wash over him. There was so much more to this than he had thought. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, something tied to the land, to their histories, to their people. We'll see, Nayeli said finally, her voice soft but resolute. But be careful, Cowboy. You've already stepped into a world that doesn't play by your rules. Jacob nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her words. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was to come. But he had no choice now. He had made his decision, and he would stand by it, no matter the cost. Jacob followed Nayeli through the dry, rocky terrain, the weight of their conversation still hanging heavily in the air. They moved in silence, each step feeling like it carried them further away from the past and closer to something neither of them could fully understand. The desert stretched out before them, the vast expanse of nothingness almost suffocating in its stillness. The wind kicked up, sending dust swirling in the air, but it did little to break the tension that had settled between them. Jacob wasn't sure where this journey was leading, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't turn back now. The question that Nayeli had posed to him, the one that had cut through him like a knife, lingered in his mind. What would he do now? Could he truly help her, Or had he just made a decision he couldn't undo? His mind raced as he glanced at her, walking just ahead of him. Her back was straight, her steps purposeful, and yet there was a sense of wariness about her, as if she was waiting for something, or someone. Jacob had never seen her this focused before. She was a woman who carried the weight of her people on her shoulders, and he could feel the burden in every step she took. She wasn't just walking for herself anymore, she was walking for her family, for her tribe, and for a past that refused to let go. The sun was low in the sky now, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Jacob glanced up, noting how the fading light made the landscape seem almost otherworldly. It was beautiful, in a way that only the wild, untamed places could be. But it was also dangerous. The desert had a way of swallowing you whole if you weren't careful, and Jacob knew they had to keep moving. He had no idea how long they had been walking, but the distance between them and civilization was growing with every step. It didn't matter. He had made a promise to himself that he would not stop until he had helped Nayeli, even if it meant losing everything else. As they reached the base of a steep hill, Nayeli stopped and turned to face him. She hadn't said much since their conversation earlier, but now there was a softness in her eyes that Jacob hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but steady. Jacob stopped a few paces behind her, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in on him. "What about?" he asked, his voice tight. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "What you're willing to risk for us. For my people." Jacob took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this conversation was coming, but he had no idea how to answer. What could he offer her? What could he offer her people, when he had nothing left to give? "I don't have much," he said, his voice rough. "But I'll give what I can." Nayeli nodded, as if she had already known the answer. She didn't need him to say anything else. "It's not just about giving," she said softly. "It's about standing with us. Against them." The words hit Jacob harder than he expected. Against them. She wasn't just talking about the people who had hurt her, her family, or her tribe. She was talking about the system, the injustice that had been going on for years, the very reason they were here. "I know what you mean," Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I'm ready to stand with you. With your people." Nayeli's expression softened just a little, but there was still a hardness in her eyes. "Then let's keep moving," she said, turning to face the path ahead. Jacob followed without another word, his heart heavy with the realization that this wasn't just a journey to help someone. It was a journey that would force him to confront his own past, his own choices, and to finally stand for something greater than himself. As they walked into the fading light of the desert, Jacob knew there was no turning back. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with it, for better or worse. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape as Jacob and Nayeli moved deeper into the desert. The stillness of the land felt heavy, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. They hadn't spoken much since their brief conversation, but Jacob felt the weight of the silence, as if they were both waiting for something, though either knew exactly what. The ground beneath them was rough, uneven, but Nayeli moved with a fluid grace, like she had lived in this land all her life. Jacob, on the other hand, felt the strain in his legs, the unaccustomed effort of keeping up with her pace. He wasn't used to walking like this, not for hours at a time, with only the distant horizon for company. The sun was sinking lower, and Jacob knew they had to find shelter before nightfall. "We need to rest," he said finally, breaking the silence. Nayeli didn't respond immediately, but after a moment she nodded. "We're close," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight Jacob hadn't noticed before. "Close to what?" Jacob asked, his curiosity piqued. Nayeli glanced over her shoulder, her dark eyes searching his face. "Close to the place where my people wait," she said. Jacob felt a pang of uncertainty at her words. He had known this was part of the journey. She had told him they were going to meet her tribe, but something about her tone now made him realize how much was at stake. He wasn't just walking alongside a woman who had a past. He was walking towards something bigger, something that would change everything. As they moved on, Jacob's thoughts began to race. What was he really getting himself into? Was he prepared for what was coming? Nayeli had asked him to stand with her people. But what did that mean? What was he really willing to risk? The wind picked up, the dry sand swirling around them, and Jacob shielded his face, squinting against the dust. They had reached the top of a small rise, and from there, he could see the valley below stretching out before them. It was a breathtaking sight. The valley, cradled by towering cliffs on all sides, seemed almost like a secret, a hidden place untouched by time. "This is where they wait," Nayeli said, her voice low but filled with something like pride. Jacob followed her gaze, taking in the view. The land was wild, untamed, and beautiful, but it was also dangerous. He could feel the weight of that danger in the air, a quiet tension that hummed beneath the surface. He had walked into a world that was not his own, and now he had to decide where he stood in it. They descended into the valley, the path narrowing as they made their way toward a small cluster of trees. The evening was settling in, the colors of the sky shifting from gold to deep purple. As they reached the trees, Nayeli finally stopped and turned to face him. "You don't have to come any farther," she said quietly. Jacob looked at her, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He didn't want to turn back, not now, not after everything that had happened. But he was also painfully aware of how little he understood about what was to come. "I made a promise," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm not backing out now." Nayeli regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, without a word, she nodded and turned toward the shadows of the trees. Jacob followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain: this was no longer just about a cowboy and a girl. This was about two people standing together, facing a future neither could fully understand, but both were willing to fight for. As they approached the trees, Jacob heard the low murmur of voices, the soft sounds of movement in the distance. They were close now, closer than he had ever imagined to a world he had never known. And as the night began to fall, Jacob knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The winds of the desert had carried them this far, but the real journey was just beginning. As Jacob and Nayeli walked deeper into the valley, the air grew thick with the scent of earth and the faintest hint of sage. The sun had all but disappeared now, leaving only the soft twilight to illuminate their path. The shadows around them lengthened, the last traces of daylight fading into a cool, dusky evening. The valley seemed alive, the sounds of nature echoing softly in the background. Jacob could hear the rustle of wind through the trees and the distant calls of animals hidden in the brush. They were getting closer. The energy in the air was palpable now, like a quiet charge that hums just before a storm. Jacob's heart beat a little faster with every step, and though he had seen many landscapes like this before, this one felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Nayeli's movements were steady, assured. She had grown quieter as they neared their destination, her focus narrowing as though she were preparing herself for something. Jacob followed her closely, sensing the change in her. She wasn't just leading him to her people, she was stepping into something much deeper. She was returning home. As they passed the final line of trees, Jacob saw them. A group of people, gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. He could make out the shapes of men and women, their clothing a blend of traditional attire and the practical gear of those who lived in the wilderness. The faces of the people watching him were unreadable. Jacob could feel their eyes on him, studying him, weighing him in a way that made him acutely aware of his presence. He was an outsider here, and he knew it. He wasn't just standing before her tribe. He was standing before a community that had its own rules, its own history, and its own way of life. He couldn't imagine what they must think of him, a cowboy from the other side of the world, walking into their camp. He was out of place. Nayeli stopped just short of the fire, her posture shifting as she straightened. Jacob stood beside her, unsure of how to act. He wasn't sure if he should say anything, or if the moment demanded silence. The crowd of people parted, and Jacob saw an older man step forward. His presence was commanding, yet his face was kind, his eyes a deep brown that seemed to carry the weight of years. He was dressed simply, with a necklace of beads around his neck and a worn jacket that spoke of years spent in the harsh outdoors. He didn't speak immediately, his gaze sweeping over Jacob before resting on Nayeli. The silence between them was thick with history, with questions unasked. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You bring a stranger with you, Nayeli?" His tone wasn't hostile, but there was an edge to it, a wariness that Jacob understood. This was a test, an unspoken challenge. "He is not just a stranger," Nayeli replied, her voice steady. "He is here because he has chosen to stand with us." The man's eyes flicked toward Jacob, appraising him. Jacob felt the weight of that gaze, but he didn't flinch. He stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest, but he knew he had to stand firm. This was where it began. This was the moment he had walked into without fully knowing what it meant. The old man nodded slowly, as though he had already made up his mind about Jacob, but was choosing to let the moment unfold. He turned back to the group, his voice carrying through the gathered people. "We will see," he said, his words simple but final. The group nodded in agreement, and the tension that had gripped the air seemed to ease, just slightly. But Jacob knew that this was only the beginning. He had passed the first test, but there were more to come. The old man turned back to Jacob, his expression unreadable. "What is it you seek here, Cowboy?" he asked, his voice low but filled with intent. Jacob took a deep breath, meeting the man's gaze. He had come here with a promise. He had come to help, but what did that really mean? What could he offer these people, these strangers who had lived through things he could only imagine? "I seek to stand with you," Jacob said finally, his voice steady. "To help where I can. To be part of something that matters." The old man studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Jacob could feel the man's gaze, like he was peeling back every layer of him, searching for something deeper. Finally, the man nodded again, but it wasn't a warm gesture. It was a signal. "We shall see what your actions speak," he said before turning back to the fire. Jacob stood there for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about following a path anymore. It was about proving that he belonged here, in a world that was far removed from his own. But he was willing to try, willing to fight for something bigger than himself. This was the beginning of something new, and he wasn't turning back. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks into the night air as Jacob stood by the edge of the circle, watching the tribe around him. The old man had spoken, and the tension that had hung in the air seemed to have dissipated, but only slightly. Jacob could still feel the weight of their gazes, the silent judgment that hovered around him, watching his every move. He wasn't sure what they expected from him, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to be an easy path. The firelight danced on the faces of the people gathered around it, their expressions serious, yet their eyes filled with something Jacob couldn't quite place. There was a quiet strength in the air, a sense of unity that Jacob felt both drawn to and intimidated by. This was a place of deep history, a place where the land and the people were one. A place that had survived when everything else had crumbled. Jacob felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. This wasn't just a tribe. It was a community built on generations of resilience. And now, he was standing at the heart of it, a stranger, unsure of what his role would be. Nayeli stood beside him, her presence a steadying force in the sea of unfamiliar faces. She had not said much since their arrival, but her silence spoke volumes. She had brought him here, but now it was up to him to prove his worth. Jacob glanced at her, but she didn't look back. Her eyes were focused on the fire, her posture unwavering. He could see that she had been here before, that this place was a part of her in a way that he would never fully understand. After a long while, the old man who had spoken earlier rose to his feet, his movements slow but deliberate. The firelight flickered on his face, casting shadows that made him look even older, wiser. He looked at Jacob for a moment, and then, without a word, he walked toward him. Jacob's heart beat a little faster as the old man approached. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself that made Jacob instinctively straighten his back. The old man stopped just in front of him, his eyes locking with Jacob's. For a moment, there was only silence, the weight of the unspoken words between them thick in the air. Then, in a voice that was as steady as the land around them, the old man spoke. "You've chosen to stand with us," he said, his voice low but firm. "But words mean little. It is actions that show who you truly are." Jacob nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "I understand," he said, his voice steady, though he could feel the nerves bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'm here to help. I won't turn away." The old man studied him for a long moment, and Jacob wondered what he was thinking, what he was seeing that Jacob couldn't. Finally, the old man nodded, his face softening just slightly. "We shall see," he said, his words heavy with meaning. And with that, he turned and walked back to the fire, his words lingering in the air long after he had disappeared into the shadows. Jacob felt a sense of both relief and uncertainty wash over him. He had passed the first test, but what would come next? What was expected of him now? He wasn't sure, but he knew he wasn't going to get answers by standing here. This was his chance to prove himself, to show that he wasn't just some cowboy who had wandered in with nothing to offer. The night stretched on, and Jacob stood by the fire, watching the tribe around him. They weren't hostile, but they weren't welcoming either. They were waiting, watching, seeing what he would do next. And Jacob knew that whatever happened, he couldn't afford to falter. He had made his choice. There was no going back now. As the night wore on, he found himself lost in thought, the flames of the fire dancing in front of him, casting long shadows on the ground. He thought of his past, the choices that had led him here, the things he had done. But he knew those things didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was what he did next. He could feel the weight of the land around him, the history of the people who had lived here long before him, and he knew that standing here wasn't enough. He had to earn his place. He had to prove that he wasn't just a stranger passing through. He had to show them that he was here for something more than just redemption. He was here to make a difference. The fire crackled again, and Jacob took a deep breath, the air heavy with the promise of something new, something unknown. And as the night deepened, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to stand with them, to earn their trust, and to find his place in this world that was both so foreign and so familiar at the same time. The following days passed in a blur of strange routines. Jacob woke early each morning, the cold desert air biting at his skin as he began to adjust to the rhythm of life within the tribe. Though he was an outsider, the people here had begun to accept his presence, watching him with a silent patience that both comforted and unnerved him. Nayeli, always at the center of everything, had become his quiet guide, showing him the ways of her people without speaking much about it. She didn't need to. Her actions were enough. He helped with the tasks given to him, gathering wood, repairing small structures, and learning how to respect the land in a way he had never truly understood before. Every task was meaningful, every action connected to something bigger than himself. As days turned into weeks, Jacob began to feel a sense of belonging, though it was still fragile, like a thin thread holding him to this new life. The nights were the hardest, when the silence would creep in, and he would lie awake staring at the stars, wondering if he had truly made the right choice. The desert was harsh, unforgiving, and yet, there was something calming about its vastness. He was learning the way of this place, slowly finding his place within it. One evening, after a long day of work, Jacob sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The warmth felt good against his skin, but it couldn't chase away the thoughts in his mind. Nayeli approached him quietly, sitting down beside him without a word. For a long time, they simply watched the fire, the crackling sound filling the air between them. Finally, Nayeli spoke, her voice soft but filled with a strength Jacob had come to recognize. "You've been quiet lately," she said. Jacob turned to look at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. She wasn't demanding anything from him, just acknowledging the shift he had felt within himself. "Just thinking," he replied. She nodded, as though she understood exactly what he meant. This place, it's not easy, is it? She asked. Jacob looked at her, seeing something in her eyes that made him realize how much she knew. She wasn't just talking about the land or the work, it was deeper than that. No, he said, his voice low. But it's honest. And that's something I'm not used to. Nayeli looked away, her gaze drifting toward the distant horizon. For a moment, Jacob thought she was lost in thought, but then she spoke again. You've come a long way, she said. Jacob didn't know how to respond. He hadn't come here with any grand plan. He had followed her, knowing he had to do something, but not fully understanding what that something was. All he knew was that he had a chance to be a part of something real. Something that mattered. I'm trying, he said finally. I don't know if I'll ever fully belong here, but I'm trying. Nayeli's gaze softened as she turned to look at him. You're already here, she said simply. Jacob was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling in his chest. I just want to do right by you, by all of you, he said. The words felt heavier than he had expected, and as he said them, he realized just how much they meant. He wasn't just here to make amends for his past. He was here to stand with them, to fight for something bigger than himself. Nayeli didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, as though she understood. The fire crackled again, the night growing deeper around them. Jacob sat back, feeling a strange peace wash over him. It wasn't the peace he had once sought in the quiet of his solitary life. It was different. It was the peace of being where he was meant to be, even if he didn't yet fully understand why. In the stillness of the desert, with the stars shining above him, Jacob realized that he was no longer just a cowboy looking for redemption. He was a man finding his place in a world that had always been more than he had ever understood. And maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. The days that followed felt like they were stretching out into an endless horizon. Jacob was no longer an outsider in the tribe. He had begun to blend into the rhythm of their lives, contributing where he could, learning what he needed to, and quietly earning his place. Yet, as much as he was accepted, the undercurrent of uncertainty still tugged at him. He could feel the weight of the past on his shoulders, the decisions he had made, and the things he had done. But as each day passed, he also began to realize something. This was no longer about redemption. It wasn't about making up for the wrongs of the past. It was about living in the present, about standing alongside these people, learning their ways, and becoming part of something greater than himself. One morning, after the sun had risen over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jacob found himself standing at the edge of the camp, looking out over the land. The air was cooler than usual, a light breeze carrying the scent of the desert with it. The peacefulness of the morning was in stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. He had always been alone, a cowboy who lived by his own rules, but here, in the vastness of this land, with the tribe, he felt something different, a sense of belonging. The silence of the desert wrapped around him like a blanket, and for a moment, he simply stood there, breathing in the quiet. He hadn't realized how much he had been missing it, the sense of being at peace with the world. Nayeli approached him quietly, her presence as steady and constant as the desert itself. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, looking out at the horizon. Jacob could feel the weight of her gaze, as though she was waiting for him to say something. It's peaceful here, Jacob said finally, his voice quiet. More than I ever imagined. Nayeli nodded, her expression unreadable. This land has a way of getting into your bones, she said. It's not just the land, though. It's the people. We've lived here for generations. It's in our blood. Jacob looked at her, sensing the truth in her words. She had spoken of her people's history before, but hearing it now, in the quiet of the morning, it felt different. I'm still learning, Jacob said softly. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand, but I'm trying. Nayeli turned to face him, her dark eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze, an understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey he had begun. You don't have to understand everything, she said. You just have to be here. Be present. Jacob nodded, taking a deep breath. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't about being perfect or about making up for lost time. It was about the moment they were living in now. That was all that mattered. The sound of footsteps approached, and they both turned to see the old man, the one who had spoken. When they first arrived, his face was as weathered as the land, his eyes sharp but filled with a wisdom that Jacob couldn't ignore. He stopped a few paces away from them, his gaze moving from Jacob to Nayeli and back again. You've earned your place here, the old man said, his voice steady and without judgment. But there are still tests ahead. There are things you must understand, things you must prove. It's not just about standing with us. It's about living with us. Jacob met his gaze, feeling the weight of the words. He knew this wasn't over. He knew there would be more to prove, more to learn. But for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to stand by these people, to stand by Nayeli. I'm ready, Jacob said, his voice firm. The old man nodded, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Jacob and Nayeli standing in the quiet of the morning. Jacob watched him go, then turned back to the land in front of him. He had made his choice. Now, it was time to live it. Nayeli stood beside him, her presence a silent support. They didn't need words now. The journey they had started was just beginning, and whatever challenges lay ahead, Jacob knew he wasn't walking them alone. The next few weeks passed quietly, but Jacob could feel the weight of anticipation building. Each day, he worked alongside the tribe, growing stronger, learning more, and slowly understanding the land and its rhythms. Yet, despite the routine, there was a growing sense that something was shifting. The tribe was preparing for something. It wasn't spoken of directly, but the quiet conversations around the fire, the gathering of supplies, and the subtle but deliberate movements of the tribe members spoke volumes. Jacob's role in this was still uncertain, though he had earned the trust of the people. The old man had made it clear that while he had proven himself, the true test was still ahead. Jacob couldn't help but feel the pressure, the weight of those unspoken words. What was the test? What was coming that would demand more from him? One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, Jacob found himself walking alongside Nayeli, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with the unasked questions. They had not spoken much that day, both lost in their own thoughts. Do you know what's coming? Jacob asked finally, his voice breaking the stillness of the desert air. Nayeli glanced at him, her face unreadable. She didn't answer immediately, instead focusing on the horizon ahead. Jacob could feel her hesitation, but he wasn't about to back down. I've seen the preparations, he continued. I know something's coming. What is it? Nayeli stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes were serious, but there was a softness there, too, a quiet understanding. It's not something you can prepare for, she said quietly. But you've proven yourself. You're ready. Jacob frowned, unsure of what she meant. Ready for what? He asked. Nayeli hesitated for a moment, as though weighing her words. The tribe is facing a challenge. And it's not just about fighting. It's about standing together, about unity. Jacob felt a chill run through him. He had no experience with anything like this. He was a cowboy, a man used to solitude, not the complexities of tribal life. But Nayeli's words were clear. This was something that would test not just his strength, but his resolve, his understanding of what it meant to be part of something bigger. I'm not sure I can do this, Jacob said quietly, his voice filled with doubt. I don't know what it means to stand with you, with all of you. Nayeli stepped closer, her gaze steady. You've been standing with us since you arrived, she said softly. It's not about knowing everything. It's about standing together, trusting each other. Jacob took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over him. He had always been someone who relied on his own strength, his own abilities. But here, with Nayeli and the tribe, he was learning something new. It wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about fighting for something worth protecting. They walked in silence for a while longer, Jacob's mind racing with the possibilities of what was to come. The desert air had grown colder as the night settled in, and the sky above them was filled with stars. Jacob looked up at the vast expanse above, feeling both small and connected to everything around him. This land, these people, were part of something much larger than he had ever imagined. And he was a part of it now, whether he was ready or not. That night, as Jacob lay in his bedroll beneath the stars, he thought about the journey ahead. He wasn't sure what would come, but he knew one thing: he couldn't face it alone. He had made a choice to stand with Naeli and the tribe, and that choice meant more than anything else now. It meant being part of something that transcended the past, something that was about building, about protecting, and about finding a place to belong. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, Jacob knew that whatever came next, he would face it with them, no matter the cost.